Good evening. Fighting continued today in Ukraine with no sense of an immediate breakthrough in talks between Kyiv and Moscow and no clarity yet about the contours of Vladimir Putin's final military ambitions. But whilst the future of the conflict remains so uncertain, what is coming into focus is the outline of a new diplomatic and economic tussle, with Russia and the West vying to hold sway in the capitals of India and China, countries whose leaders have so far managed to look both ways. With Putin stung by sanctions, there's a frenzy of activity this week to bolster his relationship with key allies. His Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has been in China today and moves on overnight to India. Moscow has set its sights on strengthening its strategic ties with Delhi, which has now abstained in seven UN votes over Ukraine-related matters. But with Liz Truss coincidentally en route tonight for her own meetings in Delhi, India will tomorrow find itself on the front line of a trade and economic battle. Here's Ben Chu.
Is a new world, economically, geopolitically, being forged? Vladimir Putin's regime is fighting back against the debilitating barrage of Western economic sanctions imposed on Russia in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine. Russia, which supplies just under half of Europe's gas, is now demanding payment from its European customers not in Western currencies, but in rubles, although when and precisely how the change will be implemented is tonight unclear. This is seen as a way by the Kremlin to try to prop up its currency, which has crashed in value in the wake of those Western sanctions. Europe, backed up by the G7, is refusing to pay in rubles, saying this demand violates the terms of existing supply contracts with Russian state energy companies. Amid all this, Germany today activated the early warning phase of its national gas rationing plan. The fear that in response to that ruble refusal, Russia will simply shut off gas flows to Europe. Energy prices have shot up again on international markets as traders price in the prospect of another sickening downward lurch in the continent's already acute energy crisis. But the Kremlin is on the move in other spheres too. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, fresh from meetings in China today, will arrive in India tomorrow. India is one of the few democratic nations that have not voted to censure Russia in the United Nations over its aggression towards Ukraine. Under discussion in Delhi will be the sale of heavily discounted Russian oil to India and a rupee to ruble denominated payment method for oil and other goods to bypass the SWIFT interbank messaging system, from which Russian banks have been significantly, albeit not yet entirely, excised. India is under pressure from other members of the China-containing Quad group, the US, Australia, Japan, to take a harder line on Russia. Yet so far Narendra Modi's government is resisting. Why?
There's a long history of relations and diplomatic support from Moscow from the days of the Soviet Union. And the second reason is that India has been historically very dependent on Russia for defense supplies and equipment. Something like 80% at peak of our defense equipment imports came from Russia. It's now down to about 50%, but spare parts to maintain the 80% bought earlier still come from Russia. And it would be very awkward indeed to suddenly cut yourself off from such a major supplier of defense equipment, especially when you've got two hostile neighbors, Pakistan and China, breathing down your borders.
Let's take a look at the big picture here. Russia is trying to connect economically with other countries without using the US dollar, which has been the hegemonic global currency since the end of the Second World War. And it seems that they might be making progress with both China and India on that front. Don't forget, those two countries really matter. Together they account for a third of the global population, and they're two of the fastest growing economies on the planet. So could democratic India make this choice to split economically and in geopolitical terms from the West, creating a new bloc?
It's a big moment for the world, and there's no question that a number of realignments are likely to happen. I mean, straddling the fence is never a comfortable position to be in. But when you're straddling the fence and dancing on a tightrope at the same time, it makes it a particularly complicated effort, and that's where India finds itself in right now. We've tried historically to avoid making some choices. So that's what non-alignment enabled us to do, to pick the battles where we wish to be involved. We may lose that luxury if this war goes on for much longer.
And Indian analysts warn there are dangers for India in aligning with a Russia-China bloc.
The more the international community pushes India, with the secondary impact of its sanctions on Russia, etc., the Indians will find the alternative payment systems that the Russians or the Chinese have more attractive. I think Indians will realize that it's probably not a great idea to sort of jump into bed with the Russians and the Chinese when it comes to economic relations or economic alternative trading mechanisms. That's going to hurt India because China will sort of call the shots.
And how feasible is it really that the currency hegemony of the dollar might be broken by an alliance of Russia, China and India? Some are doubtful.
If you take payment in rupee, then you have to spend the rupee in India because you can't spend the rupee anywhere else. The beauty of the dollar or the euro is that you can spend them anywhere in the world.
It's important to recognise just how dominant the dollar is in international trade. They account for more than 40% of international payments, followed by the euro. China's currency is a minnow, accounting for less than 5% of the total.
Dealing with Russia in non-Western, in euros and dollar currencies, marks you as somebody who's gone against the force of the United States. The United States is not yet at the point of moving to secondary sanctions like they did with Iran, where they will pursue people who engage in trade with Russia. But altogether, it's a relatively small piece in a shifting currency system which continues to revolve almost, entirely around the dollar as its main anchor.
Anchors are indeed hard to shift, and the dollar remains a powerful anchor for the global currency system, even in the face of the international hurricane stirred up by the invasion of Ukraine. But anchors do sometimes move, and history shows global orders do sometimes change.
Ben Chewell, I'm joined now by Sir Dominic